This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about honesty and telling the truth. Woo!
Just like the white-winged dove. This is what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer, Rhiannon / Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. I did not know that is what those lyrics were. I'm today years old, learning that.
Just like a white-winged dove?
It really, in my head, was more like a white window that's singing
Just
a song.
like a white window
It never
sings a song. Why is it singing?
Correct. It really never made sense, but this makes more sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I don't remember.
But why is it got to be
The
white?
Edge of 17. Why is that the name of the song? There's a reference in the song, but are doves 17? I don't know. I mean, Stevie Nicks, Enigma. I asked you yesterday, you haven't seen Daisy Jones and the Six. And then I said, you should watch it. You'll really like the music. And then I said, ooh, it might be too sad. It might be too despairing for you, in which case, shouldn't watch it. Don't watch it.
Yeah, I'm a delicate bird like a white-winged dove.
Singing a song that sounds like it's singing.
Yeah, don't see that already don't make sense. So
we had housekeeping somewhere in the realm of the tendies conversation, which has been our most corrections departmented episode from many people. My cousin reached out to me and said, how did you not reference that you come from Manchester, New Hampshire, the chicken tender capital of the world? And I said, because I didn't know. And he sent me some kind of link with regards to Manchester, New Hampshire being the chicken tender capital of the world.
I wonder if that's in consumption or in production.
I mean...
And why production would have to be specifically around tenders, I'm not sure. The finishing, perhaps.
And your brother has sent you...
multiple notes. Really, we continue to get love-hate mail around this whole tendies discussion. So if you have, other gripes, I suppose it won't matter if you pile it on because we're already getting it. So let us know. Have we also enraged you in surfacing this tendies discussion? Who knew that would be the most controversial of topics that we service? We talk about a lot of other far more serious subjects, sometimes feeling our way through the dark, but tendies is what struck people.
I think it may have just been some sort of attempt to get the city recognized with an identity to be by a comedian.
I see.
A gentleman named Nick LaValle, who I actually do know, friend of a friend, set off on a campaign to get Manchester, New Hampshire. This is off the subject.
It really is.
Shall we get into it, Jessica? I have an honest question for you.
Okay.
No, it's an actual question about honesty.
Okay.
But it's an honest question about honesty. Well, that too. I came across a study, I don't know when, last week or something, and it was looking at a number of, something like it's 40 countries. They did a study where they dropped 17,000 wallets in places with email contact information, and we're looking at the likelihood of said wallets being returned to imaginary owners. This was an academic study, had varying degrees of money inside of them. And it was interesting because the United States is sitting somewhere right around the middle of this study. If the wallet had money in it, a little over 50% of the wallets were returned. If it didn't have money in it, people weren't returning it. And they were using this. Switzerland was at the top of the likelihood for wallets to be returned, although Denmark and Sweden, if there was money, more likely to return it if a wider, on this fence diagram, a wider range between if the money was in it or not. China, Morocco, and Peru were at the bottom. Mexico, interestingly, less likely to return if there was money in it than if there was not. But this question, one, is sort of interesting that this was the metric for honesty.
Yes.
Which it feels, my first reaction was like social contract.
Yeah.
Like,
also, okay, Switzerland, I get it. One of the richer countries in the world. Like, good for you. You all have money, so you can give it back. That's fine.
But I think what's interesting is that when the wallet didn't have money in it, what was the likelihood that someone was still going out of their way was like some sort of orientation towards the social contract, right? That like you would appreciate that like replacing your debit cards or something or getting a new license is difficult, so you would find a means to get it back to the person.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me think about honesty, and I mean, clearly this study and then there are references to other studies around honesty, and it's a thing that I think we've had a fraught last 10 or so years with. There have been, everything from fake news, questions of journalism, but also things like radical candor as a movement within workplaces, and like the sort of extreme importance of honesty on one end, and then the other end of sort of the surrealist idea that like there is no such thing as the capital T truth. And it's made me wonder about, a lot of the questions with regards to AI are about like, what will happen? Misinformation is going to be radically increased online, and will we ever find truth? And so my question for you is, what is the role of truth in the coming, let's say, decade? We could say the rest of the 21st century if you want, but what is the role of truth, and how should we think about how it's changing?
Interesting. That isn't where I thought you were going with a study about honesty.
I think, well, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? Maybe should I have said honesty?
I don't know. I think maybe it goes back to the original, the first point you said, which was, it's interesting that this is the methodology for this particular study to measure honesty, when, there are all, yes, social contract maybe could be one of the things that it could be accounting for, but also like the sort of like socio-political and economic climate of a place. There's also like I just last week left or a bag of things was left on a city bike of ours that the next day was no longer there.
Yeah.
But in a city like New York, is the fact that your belongings are not where you left them the next day a product of, oh, it's because people are not trustworthy, or just like what are the odds that if you weren't coming back, like if you weren't coming back for it, or you didn't come back for it yet, do these people even want this thing that has been left behind? You know what I mean? So it's also,
it could have just as easily been like thrown away by someone cleaning the street as,
or what. I mean, it didn't read like it. Probably this bag probably didn't read like that, but it didn't also read like, oh, obviously this needs to be returned to some specific owner, is too obscure. And so that I also think is part of what, living in a city like New York, where there's so much population density, and you're like, what's the likelihood that any effort to try to return this to its owner is going to be fruitful or successful? And I guess I say this because if you're trying to, this is the overlap between any amount of like scientific study and how truthful it is. If that is sort of where you're going with it, like how useful is something like this wallet study at telling us how honest a country is.
Yeah,
or our
yeah.
peoples are.
Yeah, I think, right. Yeah, study design. I mean, by the way, right, there's sort of currently a crisis in social sciences where uh, there's like the uh, irreproducibility issue, right? Like the idea that these studies are major studies that get cited a lot and, make their way into mass media, whatever, are then uh, proving to be extremely difficult to replicate, right? Like
It just
the
feels like,
replication crisis, I think, is what they call it.
is that crisis or is that just like the scientific process being cut too short? Whereas otherwise you would have, peer review and like the other versus the quickness with which things get proliferated can cut that short and be like, look what we found. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's probably like yes and it's probably both. But there's like that component, right, where these like social science studies are having difficulty reproducing. But then it's also a question of like, I was listening to something recently and it was talking about, it was someone who wrote a book and there was an interview with the author. I believe it was like, I'll find it in a moment, but it was about like the race to the North Pole and
Santa
and the New York City like newspapers and the ways in which like these newspapers were being manipulated to cover the race between the two people that were like, Cook being one of them and the other gentleman being the other gentleman.
Yikes.
But about how like fake news was historically like always a thing that newspapers and journalists would publish things quickly, and there was like an understanding among people that like you had to take things with a grain of salt and assess for yourself whether you wanted to believe it. And newspapers were notorious for like playing tricks on their readers and like good fun and eventually like tell the truth or things like that. But then the New York Times and a number of other institutions sort of oriented towards like, no, we have to like do capital T truth. We're not going to try and trick our readers. We're not going to like knowingly publish fake things. But it made me think about this idea of like, we're sort of existing in this moment of truth that as someone who was born in that moment, you sort of anticipate that to be like things were always that way because they were that way when I was alive, but that that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that we interact and appreciate those things in an ongoing way. And if this whatever AI content proliferation, fake information, hallucination crisis, winds up being true, that the internet just becomes filled with like generative AI blather, then like does that just bring us back to a way things were? Or like the radical candor movement, like is it important to be honest in that way to where you're hurting people's feelings or crushing souls? Like I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this both from sort of the teller side of honesty and truth versus like the receiver side of like trusting or the opposite of being skeptical of things that you are receiving, or confirming or validating the things that you are receiving, and like whose responsibility is it on, or what degree of onus is put on either party here. Like I think whether this is, I think the moment the moment of truth right now, it seems, is putting the onus on the receiver, given the sheer volume of information accessible to all of us, that it is your own responsibility to always receive things with a grain of salt. But which also is an interesting premise in my mind, because I may have a I can't even explain it well why I believe that there are places where blind faith are valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting, like the sender receiver dynamic that you're talking about is like honesty is about like, I'm telling you a thing that to the best of my knowledge, I think is true, right? Or like capital T true, but it doesn't have to be. Like it's like, what did you see? This is what I saw. Like, well, actually, you didn't have the right vantage, and a thing happened
Right.
at a certain angle, and that may not have actually been true.
Right.
But I was being honest in telling you, or whatever.
To the best of my ability, or given what we know now. I think this is a thing that happens all the time in journalism of like, this is like, that's not what happened. It's like, maybe now we know it's not what happened, but at the time, that is actually maybe what we thought is what happened. And things change. Our knowledge of and awareness of things changes. And that is also weird to grapple with. Like the fact that you're like, well, in one's context, that was honest.
Yeah.
If not now, wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun. I'm like thinking about phrases and things because Emerson has been going through this phase where she like points her finger at you real close to her face and says, "Tell me the truth. Tell me the truth." And it started where our friend was like, "Emerson, did you poop?" And she was like, "I didn't poop. What are you talking about?" And then he went to the bathroom and she's like, "Tell me the truth. Did you poop?" And was like grilling him, like shining the light in his eyes.
He started it.
Yeah. But like that phrase, "Tell me the truth," it like is just like, help me understand the world. Help me have like a shared like worldview with you. But the flip side of that is like, what are the hard truths? Like, what are the things that if you want the truth, it's not going to feel good for a while, right? Like,
yeah, if you drop your wallet and it's got $100 in it, I'm going to take it. And I'm not going to tell you.
Well, I'm thinking more like the hard truth is, not actually at you. Like, you're not a good dancer, right? If someone's like, "Yeah, you can't dance," it's like, what is the benefit of knowing that? It's like, dancing is fun. I don't need to be a good dancer, or someone doesn't need to tell me I'm a bad dancer if I'm having a good time. But like that, or the hard truth of like dating or something, like I just don't find you attractive, or like, what are those, like, is knowing the truth in all contexts actually like mutually beneficial? Or like, that's where those, like, that question of like white lies comes in, and like, what is the gray zone? And I think,
gray lies.
Yeah, gray. What are the gray lies? But like those ideas are based on like moral premises, right? And the idea that like the truth is divine, right? Or like that honesty is divine, that one, like, thou shalt not lie type of ideas.
Yeah, we're just eschewing sanctity is really what's happening.
That's what we do.
The moment of truth is eschewing sanctity.
The moment of truth where you have to confront. I mean, there's a lot of phrases like that. I just don't know. Like, I feel like I try to be an honest person, but I am also a person who would be happier to tell someone like a white lie than a hard truth in a situation where I can't see a benefit of knowing it, like supporting someone's emotional state. If there's nothing to be gained from a hard truth, seems more morally just to me, I don't know.
Rather than being like, and while you're down,
yeah,
let me remind you that you did a bad job.
Yeah. Can I poke you in the eye?
See, you may not realize it in this moment where you're down, but actually I should let you know that it's actually your own doing.
Yeah.
Because
your breath,
failed it.
Your breath stinks.
Oh, and while we're here.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of things you didn't do or you did do for that matter.
Yeah, I don't, like, where is the line in this context? And I mean, when I first looked at this, I was like, oh, what is America? I was kind of curious. Like I've scanned through whatever the equivalent of like national post-centric of whatever, like looking like where does the culture that I exist in sit in this sort of charts orientation to things, right? And you hear things about people going to like Scandinavia and like hearing hard truths of like because it in some regards it is a more direct culture, and people will tell you, I don't like when you do that, like things like that, and they're like, oh, that's a lot. Ooh, it's very direct. Yes. But is it about like, is that about honesty? Is that about truth? Should we be trying to be more honest or more truthful in certain environments and not in other environments? Like where does it break? Where does it divide?
And this comes back, you love to talk about Minnesota nice and the whole realm of honesty.
Move to Canada,
veiled,
Minnesota. No.
Right? Or like, because what you're even describing with sort of the brutal honesty is also like, it is both objectively whether it is the truth or whether it is a lie, and then there is the valence of intensity of whether that is like, oh, veiled and like put it in it, try to be wrapped up in a bow, but it's still not great, and then or is it just like bam, slap you in the face, your breath smells bad or whatever it is. And then, or what's that smell?
Yeah. Oh, do you smell that?
Oh, must be
it's sort of near you. It's like near you in your face, but I can't put my finger on it. Near you. Like, but when you open your mouth, it's more.
Oh, that's so
weird.
Oh, that is
I wonder what it is. I can't figure it out. Yeah, no, I don't. This is like, this sort of fits in that like euphemism conversation, yes. I guess.
Yes, it does.
That we had a few months ago, but like,
what I think is interesting, because at the beginning of this conversation, I didn't understand. I think that this way that you're viewing honesty, I hadn't come across to me that way, because the first way I was interpreting it was more around like the internal sort of dialogue of like, how do we wrestle with, all right, so you're presented this situation, do I do the right thing, do I do the wrong thing? And that is a very like inward type of decision. But actually where you had gone with it was talking more about this external, or like, how do we honesty in terms of like what is put out into the world, or what we say to somebody, or like how we act towards other people. But I do think there's something interesting about like the internal honesty and like what we are willing to live with ourselves around words. Like if we're talking about the orientation of people in the United States, like what tolerance do we have of doing a thing and living with ourselves with that thing? I feel like my guess would be high.
Yeah.
But I don't know why.
Yeah.
Just tied to brazenness.
Yeah.
Just but yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think so. There's something like in what you said too, of like, if you go back and look at what that study is, which is using like the return of property that you didn't actually take, but that you feel some responsibility, and tying it to honesty, and the question of whether is viewing this through the lens of giving and taking important in the way to right, and maybe in Scandinavian cultures, as an example, the perception is that by not giving someone your honest opinion, you're actually taking something from them, whereas in some of these other cultures, whether it's the US or elsewhere, the calculus is like, in giving them the truth, am I like taking away their happiness or what, or at least maybe in my own part, like the idea of like, if I tell you the hard thing, like, what do you get? What do I get out of this situation? If the net is not positive, like, keep it to myself. It's also like a subjective opinion. So in which case I could be honest, but maybe it is not the truth.
This is where
right?
I think is the reason why I wasn't clear in the first place, because whether you tell someone something like, oh, there you've got a little green thing in your teeth or whatever like that is something that you are holding on to, and you could or could not provide that to them, and it may hurt them, or it could do something bad. Whereas like in the case of the wallet, you have something that they would be happy to have back, and you know it, right? It's like a better comparison would be like someone said something really nice about someone, and you're just trying to decide whether or not to pass it along, or I mean, more because you can anticipate how it will be received, right? So the types of variables you're considering are really different, rather than, just like, oh, it's difficult here. Maybe you get into muddy ground of where in the wallet scenario, you're like, well, if it's not me, is someone else going to take the wallet? And then they're still going to be out of a wallet. Like, better that I am the recipient.
It's funny. I've forgotten about it until you said this. I found a neighbor's wallet recently, not someone I know well, but I was able to put together that it was this person's wallet. It was nothing identifying, but there was like a way in which, I'm trying not to like divulge anything about the person, that I was like, it's this person. I spoke to them once. It's like 11:30 at night, but I know they work late at a hotel, and I know it's like one of two hotels. So then I call both the hotels, and the person's not like, I tried like to get that. I'm like, if I lost my wallet, I would be freaking out.
I want to.
And was able to eventually get it back to them. They were not at that job. They were at a different job. And like the person like, why are you calling here? I'm like, I found his wallet.
Like, look, I'm just trying to help
But
you out.
In that moment, I was not thinking about honest. Like my question, the questions in my head weren't about honesty. It was like about like social responsibility.
Right. Well, exactly. That's why I think in there's a pretty broad range of scenarios that we've been discussing so far, which bring up the things that you're weighing in your mind, even if broadly it could fall under a bunch of different ways of interpreting the word honesty, actually is super, super different. Like, I think similarly, like, okay,
are you an honest person versus like, are you being honest?
Yes, exactly. Those are very different. Or, okay, so you are, you check your mail and you have received a package with an address that is not your address. You're like, okay, so this has happened multiple times where usually the address is near-ish. Maybe it's like the same zip code, but several times it's been a good excuse to just go for a walk and bring that thing to the other place. But I feel like people tend to be pretty surprised. They're like, oh, wow. Thank you, but that is almost
why
like
are you at my house?
Not expected, not expected. Didn't expect to see somebody here bringing.
They're actually creeped out that you did the right thing.
Well, not like appreciative, but also like
you are creepily honest.
Yeah. Like, interesting that you did this, and it's like, well, I don't know. What if it was important? Like, what if you? Yeah. I don't know what's in this package.
There's no reward for this package.
Meanwhile, in another use case, though, there was somebody who lived in our address previously who must have worked in some film industry, because they were receiving all of these like just the previews,
screeners, or whatever.
Screeners of various films, and it was just like tried to return to sender, couldn't, not obvious where to send this to, and then it's like, what do you do? Do you like
you just watch some screeners?
Now, right? Like, is this mine? Eminent domain?
Oh, free movie. Yeah. Well, Jess, I think this brings us to your honesty corner. Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
He's doing the finger thing, just in case you want to know. If you hold it really close to your face, like you're pointing outward. That's actually really hard to describe. Wow, we really went on a winding journey, starting with whether or not you would return a wallet that you found randomly if there were contact information inside and potentially or potentially not money in it, to what is the state of telling the truth? What are the benefits of telling the truth? To even, are you just like an honest person? Are you the kind of somebody who would do a good deed or not? But this whole spectrum of discussion, I feel like, is something that we have on our minds a lot. I wonder what that tells us about ourselves, that this is a thing that we cogitate on.
I mean, it probably comes back to trust, right? I guess. Dang it, it all comes back to trust. Cue Billy Joel. It's all just a matter of trust. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I don't have the right.
You say it, or we're going to say all the credits like cow people.
Yep. Let's go to that. Let's go to our cowboy credits.
Okay, this is the end.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Oh no, I don't know how to do it. Brought to you by Truth Skits. It's like Triscuits, but with
more honest.
Special honest powers.
As always, we'd like to thank executive producer and disciple of Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Jess Vander.
You're welcome. Also, we'd like to thank sound engineer, and definitely has not lost his wallet, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank programming coordinator and bullshit detector, Les Jacobs.
And thanks to our production crew, the kind, honest, and generous souls, Sarah Gilbert and Nora Mestrich.
And as always, thank you, Sarah Ellen.
Excellent.
Special thanks, karaoke. Open orchestra.
Yeah. A special thanks to those video series where the celebrities do the lie detector test, and knowingly having a lie detector strapped onto them and being filmed, they still sometimes lie about stuff. I mean, that's gold right there.
Yeah, that's just, we're not going to talk about this. Yeah, I lied, but you don't know the truth.
You're like, haha, but no.
Yeah, we're not getting into it.
Also, speaking of special things.
What happens in Macau stays in Macau.
Special thanks. Standing with the strikes aside, you must at least respect the late night show game, where it's like you can tell the truth, but if you're unwilling, your alternative is to like have to eat some gross food or like spicy wing, or like you have to accept some kind of repercussion.
Did you just describe Truth or Dare?
Wait, no, that's not how Truth or Dare works. Truth or Dare is you decide at the onset which path you're taking. It's not like, oh, that wasn't true, now you must accept this dare.
Yeah, modded Truth or Dare. Do you know the penalty before you don't answer? It's like, eat these boogers or answer this question.
That's true, but blind, so you don't know what the options are. Another special thanks to Truth or Tea to the Ruth, my preferred variation of this game, wherein there's
just
no
truth or truth.
Outlet.
Yeah.
There's no escape.
Tell me the truth. Well, love you, mean it.
Bye.